this is where we really get into some muddy waters as far as why Marvel Legends is very disliked. Having completely forgotten that I, out of impulse, put down a pre-order for the Marvel Spider-Man 2. I don't even want to call it a re-release or reissue, because that definitely sparked a debate, not only in the Marvel Legends versus McFarlane Toys video essay that I put up on the channel, but also a few weeks prior to that, I put up a video discussing whether or not certain Marvel Legends, or Marvel Legends as a whole, are going to be worth picking up in 2023, and one of those figures highlighted was the very controversial Spider-Man 2 based on the Insomniac / PS5 render. Being in my feelings, when this was announced, I kind of jumped at the gun at a pre-order through BBTS because I figured there, at least I can put down a pre-order without it charging me ahead of time until it finally ships. And at the time, I was being told it was not going to be shipping until August. So imagine my bewildering surprise, quote unquote, when I got an email last week saying, hey, yeah, we went ahead and charged your card and we're going to go ahead and send this to you. Well, at least it'll make for content, so here we go. However, a particular circumstance happened, I want to say about last month or the month prior, that's going to bring this to the cusp of it being a comparison and also an argument as to why Marvel Legends is often very hated by a lot of collectors these days. But more on that a little bit later. Let's go ahead and discuss the topic at hand, which is going to be the Insomniac Marvel's Spider-Man 2 Spider-Man figure, which is going to be the PS4, or at least we can now call it the PS5 version. And as you can see right here, he is on full display with the iconic suit that now boasts the white spider symbol. So whenever you see this guy, you know that this is the PlayStation version that we have gotten from Insomniac Games. And the overall concept of the suit has definitely warmed up to me since the game was first unveiled back in 2016, and as it kind of went along to its release in 2018, I really warmed up to that white symbol. I really was one of those folks that was a little bit on the conservative side. I wanted to be a bit of a purist and retain the black symbol, but over time, I really dig the actual suit that they created for that original game, and so to see it kind of be reutilized here for a Marvel Spider-Man 2 figure that's being reincarnated, so to speak, in much more contemporary sensibilities for Marvel Legends to kind of bring everything that they've honed in and learned to bring us a 6-inch scale figure. And this is most definitely a solid, really well made and crafted Spider-Man figure, and it should be, because this is technically already a repaint of a pre-existing awesome Spider-Man figure. You've guessed it, and some people have already kind of deducted this from its first unveiling from the Hasbro Marvel Legends, or Hasbro Pulse guys, during the presentation. And if you guessed the Renew Your Vows buck, you guessed correctly. As you can see right there, it's the exact same body, of course with slight little modifications, but overall, you're pretty much dealing with the exact same body sculpt. So if you're going to be borrowing, you best borrow from the best. And ultimately, that's one thing that if you have to cave into those sensibilities of doing repaints and reissues, at least they are taking one of the better showings of a Marvel Legends Spider-Man sculpt and actually drawing the best things about it, the best qualities when it comes to articulation, build, sculpting, and it definitely works in favor of the Insomniac Spidey because it actually does a great job of replicating the physique that he had in that game, where he's a little bit on the athletic lean side while at the same time still retaining an awful lot of the musculature and not going overboard on bulkiness or kind of tampering with the proportions a bit, especially alongside the torso area where it looks like he's again kind of funneling down on his physique. He doesn't look like he's very lunky, but at the same time he looks like he's able to hone in on a punch and deliver on that wallop. So you see an awful lot of the musculature coming through the torso and most especially the thighs, while at the same time not throwing off the proportions, not doing anything too massive or over the top. And therefore, like I said, out of all of the bucks that I've encountered thus far in my quote-unquote career of reviewing Marvel Legends, this is definitely one of the ones that's going to favor the Insomniac Spidey and looks the part. And since this is meant to be a much more athletic Spidey, that articulation needs to be on point. And being that this is the Renew Your Vows buck, that articulation is actually going to come pretty in handy. The head is able to fully rotate 360 as well as being able to pivot upwards and downwards pretty generously due to that hinge. The arms are able to rotate 360 vertically and extend properly, although mine are a little bit on the snug side. And as mentioned before, even with the Renew Your Vows version, that bicep joint is just a little bit on the thin side, so do be careful when extending to the side. I highly recommend that you use your fingers to then hone in on the joint at the top of the arm as opposed to kind of using the bicep for leverage. That bicep, however, can still rotate 360 and is pretty firm, at least on my unit. Two joints at the elbows that are fully able to bend all the way up, as well as, of course, the wrist swivel that is able to rotate 360, as well as pivot inwards and outwards. And much like the Renew Your Vows Spidey, there are a plethora of articulation joints within the torso that I absolutely adore, and it's one of the finer things that Marvel Legends has done recently with their models. One, it has to be the butterfly joint inside of the shoulders that is able to move the arm forwards and inwards and kind of develop a little bit of this flexing motion with across the chest and from the back, so that's always very much appreciated for a Spidey figure. And then, of course, the horizontal cut here in the middle of the torso that is able to rotate pretty much an even 360 degrees horizontally, as well as crunch inwards slightly, but then extend very generously towards the back, as well as solid oblique crunch from side to side. Then if you need some further extrapolation on the crunching, you get that hinge joint that is flipped towards the bottom, but is able to then flex the waist a whole lot more towards the front and towards the back. Especially for a character like Spidey, this is well appreciated. The legs are able to flip upwards, as well as being able to slightly bend towards the back a little bit, but of course the very tight sculpt, as you can see by the little bit of stretching of the suit that they still went and sculpted into the costume, which I am very thankful for, is then present there, and of course that's going to come in the way, but you are still able to extend the legs towards the sides, almost at a 180 degree angle, but not quite fully there. Thigh swivels are still present, so you're able to rotate right there. It does kind of cut along the musculature, but they are still able to rotate a full 360 for positioning, as well as, of course, the swivels on the boots. Of course, this time around, it is going to be a little bit more present than that of the Renew Your Vows Spidey, because you don't have the help of the illusion via the red boots. So, being that this is all completely blue, it's going to cut off a little bit there, and it's a bit more apparent, but it is found there. And then, of course, you have the two joints at the knees that are fully able to bend all the way upwards. And yes, once again, those ankle joints are present. I mean, I'm kind of a broken record at this point, but they do what they have to do. Pivot upwards and downwards. Mine's were a little bit on the stiff side, so I have to give it an extra little pass with the hairdryer. But of course, rotation is not really there unless you kind of incline them towards the inside or towards the outside, or you bend the foot all the way downwards to get that happening. Of course, if you want any kind of horizontal movement, you're going to have to rely on the thigh cuts or the boot swivels. However, much like Renew Your Vows Spidey, in a very surprising manner, you got toesies that are able to bend slightly adjacent at about a 45 degree angle, so not fully all the way up, but at the same time, even though they're a little bit on the loose side, they are also able to point a little down, which is a little awkward, but I guess toes can technically do that, so why not Spidey's? So objectively so far, not a bad figure. I mean, again, it's still technically a repaint of that Renew Your Vows Spidey, and so in the modern age of Marvel Legends of a Year of Our Lord 2023, you expect there to be at least a brand new model for the newest incarnation of Spidey, especially for the video game version that we very seldom get figures of. But at least, again, like I mentioned before, if you're going to replicate a figure or reuse one for a repaint, at least use one of the finer ones. So far, we're ticking the boxes of making a pretty solid incarnation of the PS5 Spidey, but to me, at least in a much more subjective manner, I feel like something is off, or at least a multitude of things, both on the figure and off, are very much off. And so in order to be able to continue along with that, we have to go into the comparison side of things, and we need to bring in the original 2018 Spider-Man from the Insomniac game on PlayStation 4. So I guess by now, the little monikers that we can practically use is PS4 2018 Spidey, PS5 2023 Spidey. And you can definitely see an awful lot of distinctive choices they made with the brand new incarnation, and some for the better and some for the worse. And this is where things get kind of funny for me, because originally I really was just going to review this guy, But it wasn't until back in March of 2023 that I was actually during a trip passing by City of Industry in Southern California and stopped at Frank & Son's collectible show. It was at this vendor show that I came across a vendor who was selling this guy brand new mint in box, and of course no longer mint because I had to crack him open for the sake of this review, but he was selling the 2018 Spidey here for $55. And there was just something in my gut that said, do it. Do it. If not for at least content on the channel like you see before you're here, do it. And after doing a little bit of research and comparisons online with some other listings found on Mercari, eBay, that was actually a pretty decent price for the 2018 Spidey mint in box. $55 with a little bit of tax, but that's it. And no shipping costs because I'm actually finding it in person. I'm able to inspect the figure, make sure everything is included, which obviously it was. And so this is actually a bit of a particular find. And I thought to myself, well, if for anything else, once this guy rolls around, we can roll in a comparison and really hammer across the 5 years of change that Marvel Legends underwent. And I'll have to give a little bit of credit to the brand new 2023 model, is that this guy, I definitely do feel like he is the utilization of a prior Marvel Legends Spidey. Unfortunately, I'll tell you guys right now, I'll fully confess, I don't know what model it's using. I don't know if it's a repaint, I don't know if it's a brand new sculpt. I just know that there's very distinguishable similarities in Buck, but there's very noticeable differences, especially alongside the torso, head, and leg area. But once we kind of do away with that, it's pretty much a very similar figure. I just get this feeling, this notion that this was a prior Spidey that was probably just your average Spidey from the comic books, whether it be some of the more contemporary books that were released at the time or something from the 90s, and they just painted it with the PS4 color scheme, especially with that white symbol, the white gauntlets, and of course the little accents alongside the boots and soles of the shoes. Outside of that, it really just feels like your typical Spidey Buck, but just kind of passed along as that PS4 version. That's not to say that it's a bad figure. It still has very solid sculpt. It's actually kind of weighty in hand, and there's a very solid build to the articulation and to the feel of the joints that definitely has some production value behind it. But there's still little qualities here and there that just feel like this was just your average Spidey, and they just painted it with the PS4 deco. That head sculpt definitely belonged to a prior Spidey. It almost doesn't even look like the 2018 model. You have these squinted eyes, you have a very jagged and square jaw. It's just looking very, very off. It almost doesn't even look like it belongs on this body, but it is color schemed the correct way. I just don't think that the actual proportions of the head match, and because of that, something is kind of thrown off and gives me that vibe that this is a pre-existing Spidey and it was just given the color scheme of the PS4 version, whereas the brand new 2023 model actually has a head sculpt that looks very reminiscent of the new renders. It's very faithful, very proportioned. You even have much more wider lenses that kind of peak towards the top, and overall it has a much more beautiful head sculpt that's molded and sculpted and painted on beautifully. Of course, a secondary part of me would have liked to have had some of the webs and little details on the body itself be sculpted into the plastic as opposed to just painted on. Many other people have already discussed this on Twitter, on Reddit, but this is just something that we're going to have to deal with at the moment. But at least I can take solace in knowing that that is one beautiful head. And this would be the perfect segue to point out some of the more distinctive differences. Of course, there's some of the more superficial and obvious ones based on the upgraded design of the suit that wasn't really beholden to Marvel Legends, but more so Insomniac and what they kind of passed down as far as their blueprints and the schematics of what works on the suit. And most of them are going to be very easy to distinguish. To me, has to be the little blue streaks that are alongside the shoulder that are completely absent on the brand new 2023 design. The spider symbol is a little bit on the wider and taller side and a little bit more blown out, both on the front and back. And then of course the more notable quote-unquote belt, where you can see that it's a one whole piece on the original 2018, whereas the 2023 version kind of has like these little divides on the sides here where it kind of breaks away, but then it starts to bleed up towards the top side of the suit. And then, of course, most notably, the little bit of differences on the white gauntlets and the knuckles. This is actually one of the area where I favored the design of the 2018 model versus 2023. I like how the knuckles stand out a little bit better on that one as opposed to just the slapped on white of the brand new 2023. And then you see a little bit more white accents, more predominant on the 2018 shoes as opposed to that of the brand new 2023s. You also see this patch of red webbing alongside the thighs, as well as the absence of said patch on the brand new one. But you can see right here that the new one does have slimmer thighs as opposed to the very beefy and bulky ones of the 2018. This is again kind of going back to what I was mentioning about how this feels like a prior existing Spidey that was just given the PS4 deco as opposed to this one that feels much more favorable in physique. Where I think the 2018 model shines a little better, and one of the things that stood out to me as just being completely off from the publicity photos that were first unveiled for this guy is that coat of paint, is that hue of blue that I personally just do not like. I actually favor this blue, even as muted as it is, much better than that of the brand new one. The brand new one just looks a little washed out, and it may look a little bit more favorable in the lighting in-game once we play the game, but in figure form, no matter in the light box here or in a different setting or when I pick up the figure and I was unboxing it in different circumstances, this blue has never appeased to me whatsoever. Whereas this one, as muted as it is, it just clashes better with the red being utilized here, that even if it's not one-to-one with the render that we see in-game in 2018, it speaks to me a bit better. And that's where we start to fall into some of the more subjective takes that you can have between the two figures. That's just going to depend on the person. Another area of that subjectiveness would have to be the articulation, which for the most part, for the sake of not repeating myself here, is identical save for a couple of areas in the torso. You may have noticed that the torso joints are completely different. They're almost kind of like the inverse of each other. The horizontal cut is on the waist of the 2018 model, whereas in the 2023, it's amongst the mid-torso area that's able to not only rotate 360, but it's also able to crunch inwards, upwards, left to right. This one is just a strictly horizontal cut that is ratcheted and actually clicks in place whenever you move it and feels pretty solid and firm, but it's just meant to be for the movement of the waist from side to side. Whereas the hinge is actually pointing upwards instead of downwards, and it does allow the torso to crunch inwards and upwards, but not in any other kind of direction. Still, the feel of said crunch is actually pretty firm and really premium quality because it makes that clicking noise that feels very firm, like it's actually going to stay in place. Whereas this time it's actually on the waist, so you're going to have to rely on the mid-torso cut for any kind of rotation on the 2023. Aside from that, it's pretty identical almost all across the board. Once you get to the feet, however, you'll notice that we still got those brand new toesies on the Renew Your Vows version of Spidey that was carried on over to 2023, whereas 2018 unfortunately did not luck out with the shoes because you only got the ankles and no toesies whatsoever. So whether you like the hinge in the middle part of the torso or a little lower like on the 2023, that's going to be completely dependent on you. But what is objectively better, and where there's no rhyme or reason to disagree, is that these are pinless. The articulation joints on the 2023 are pinless as opposed to the original 2018 model, and that's one thing that I do wish that not only Marvel Legends but even McFarlane Toys and some other companies would try to strive for a little bit. It's a nice fine touch that does require an extra bit of production, but when they nail it downright. And I always love it when figures are able to hone in on the articulation, not compromise joints or mobility, and bring on that seamless illusion-like look of the pinless joints. It's beautiful. What's not beautiful and downright ugly will have to be the area where we do start to break apart into a camp of whether or not this is ethical, and that is ultimately value amongst the accessories and what's packed in with the brand new version of Marvel's Spider-Man 2 from the Insomniac game. And it's a very fair point because a lot has happened in 5 years, especially the price that you're paying and the value that you're getting back, and why it is that so many people are now canceling their orders, are now kind of swaying away from Marvel Legends altogether and just leaning towards either McFarlane Toys for their DC fix or just purchasing much more high-end figures for any kind of Marvel character that they're willing to go out on a limb on. And the price is really indicative of that. This guy was released in 2018 for $23. I had to go through the Wayback Machine and actually pinpoint exactly how much it was upon release. $23, which is still a little pricey for what exactly you're dealing with in the 6-inch scale, but it's not exactly a deal breaker per se. Jump 5 years later, and we got this guy for $35, almost a whopping 1.5 times more expensive. In some markets, you might even find it for $36, depending on what shipping costs are and what logistics need to play in for like companies like Big Bad Toy Store. And so what exactly are you getting and not getting in that interval of $12 necessarily? Well, like I mentioned before, even though you are getting a much better physiqued figure, it is still nonetheless a repaint. It's not a brand new model. It's not a brand new sculpt that has little fine touches like the webbing being actually sculpted into the body of the mold. You're not doing any extracurricular activities with the figure, save for maybe a beautiful head sculpt. Everything else is a bit more on the passive side. That's very simple to simply just hit that button. So what exactly can you compensate as far as accessories are concerned? That's where things truly do get heated. Let's get the easy things out of the way, the web accessories, because typically Spidey figures from Marvel Legends are always going to come with web strands and web accessories. This is where we do get a little bit of an improvement and opportunistic look at the brand new 2023 model, and point over to that camp, because the original 2018 model came with not one but two of the same strand web strand accessories as you see before you here. It's one that we've seen time and time again with various incarnations of Spidey through Marvel Legends. It's the easiest piece of web accessories that they were able to replicate and just print out. And the 2018 model was no exception. It's the same strand with the little hoop here on one side and the little coil on the other, and they didn't just throw in one, but two. The only thing that I do think is kind of neat is that they're actually filled in. It's not translucent, and to me, web accessories always feel a little bit better when they're filled in. The quality just feels a bit much more durable, and it looks a little bit better when it comes to displays and on camera. But nevertheless, it's still the same two strands, and that's ultimately what you're dealt with as far as the 2018 model. Now, with 2023, they went a little extra, actually. No, I mean, don't get me wrong, they still threw in that. It's actually kind of hilarious at this point, but they still threw in the web strand here, as you could see, and is the exact same goddamn piece, but it's translucent this time. I personally don't like the translucentness of it, but it might look cool. It really it depends on preference of the collector. But nevertheless, it is back with a vengeance. But what was also thrown in were these two web splat pieces that are a little familiar. If you collected an awful lot of Marvel Legends throughout 2021 and 2022, you'll recognize them almost instantly. They've been thrown in with a handful of other Spideys, but they are thrown in with the 2023 version, so you can pose them with those. And then we get a little wacky and crazy. They threw in what I guess you can call a web trap piece that, as you can see right here, is kind of shaped into a bit of a wide cone. And based on the look, you can tell that this is ultimately designed to go on a secondary figure, most notably the demon figures that were thrown in as part of the Gamerverse from the original PS4 Spidey. So it is a little cool, even though I'm personally a little SOL on them because of the fact that I don't own any of those figures. So you can either use it on the prior Spidey or any other kind of enemies that Spidey typically goes up against. So that's a little neat. And in a similar vein, he is thrown in with this piece that is kind of like a web mask that has the same purpose as this. It's meant to be utilized on enemy figures for poses and dioramas, but they are, of course, favoring those characters. So unless you have a secondary character to pose them with, this is meant to go up on the face to make it look like he's splatting the face and trapping them and muzzling them. But this is the big one. This is it. This is where we really get into some muddy waters as far as why Marvel Legends is very disliked by an awful lot of people, especially collectors that were sticking with them for the longest time and were giving them the benefit of the doubt. As you've seen throughout the entirety of this review, both Spideys boast fisted hands that were fitted on for the prospects of this review. The 2018 model came with a secondary pair of web shooting hands. They're both symmetrical to each other, left and right, but they are meant to be swappable for his two fisted hands, so you have an even playing field here. What did 2023 Spidey come with? That's where things get, for lack of a better term, kind of He gets one wall crawling hand and one web shooting hand. The web shooting hand is meant to be for the right, wall crawling is for the left. It's one thing to maybe not have the aforementioned wall crawling hands on the original 2018, that is a wasted opportunity, but the whole point of this happening in 2023 for the brand new game, especially when you have the game developer saying, hey, we're about to make a brand new game. This is the Marvel Legends opportunity for them to improve on the prior figure, learn from their mistakes, learn from what they can improve to make the ultimate figure, warrant the extra $12 cost, and improve on the things that they fell short on. But what was their response? Cut out the symmetrical values of at least giving us 2 web shooting hands again, and throw in 1 wall crawling and 1 web shooting. So if you want to pose them with him shooting a web, it has to be the right hand. No ifs or buts about it. It's f***ing ridiculous. You can only pose them on the right hand. You can't interswap. You can't play around with it. You can't do like a surprise attack with the open hand here unless he's looking to the left, because that's his only hand that he's able to do it with, the left hand. If you want to web shoot in the middle, like if he's floating or like swinging or whatever, you can't do that. Can he hold any of these web strands? No, because none of the hands are open. Nevertheless, you can maybe wrap him around the wrist, but still, at that point, what is really even the point? It just looks very off. And that's where things get ultimately very sad, because in no way, shape, or form is this a bad figure. This is still, like I said, a pretty good figure. It is a repaint, but at least you're repainting for one of the finer examples of a Spidey Marvel Legends in quite some time, the Renew Your Vows Spidey. It was one of the best voted figures by many collectors. It ended up being, I think, my number 2 or maybe number 1 Spidey in my top 5 Spideys from last year, or at the very end of 2022. And so to see it being used for the 2023 incarnation from the Insomniac game that's coming up, one of my most anticipated titles of the year, that's at least a point in the right direction, even though I would have preferred a brand new sculpt. Then we get to the accessories and the price point that you're selling it all at, and it's quite frankly a travesty that Marvel Legends is really resorting to this. A practice that is very reminiscent of a company like Nintendo. Yes, I'm saying it here, Marvel Legends is reminding me an awful lot of Nintendo, where for every step forward, like a very polished and quality game like, say, Tears of the Kingdom or Super Mario Odyssey or any other game that is very polished and very reminiscent of why you love Nintendo games back when you were a kid and give you that fun factor, they then take 2 steps back, like going on YouTube and filing a bunch of claims for YouTubers that do nothing but just give them free publicity for their goddamn games. Marvel Legends to me is kind of in that same echelon where for every step in the right direction, like Renew Your Vows Spidey, they take 2 steps back of really not packing in the punch and not being a valuable competitor to companies like McFarlane, Mattel, Spin Master, and dealing with bullshit like this where you really gotta go ahead and spike up the price and still do really questionable choices with your accessories in ways that really make it much more understandable for collectors to cancel their orders, to then kind of shy away from you as a company and take their business elsewhere. And by that technicality, I will be giving the Marvel Spider-Man 2 Marvel Legends figure here from the PlayStation 5 game a 6 out of 10. It would have been a little higher should there have been quantifiable accessories like an extra pair of hands, or simply just duplicate. How hard would it have been to just throw in another web shooting hand for the other wrist, another wall crawling hand, and frankly that would have gone the extra mile of speaking volumes, saying, hey, here's the value for that extra $10 to $12. And I know a lot of people are going to come forward saying inflation and all these other things, but you gotta remain competitive. Look who's giving us value for an interchangeable hands, accessories, and quality in the plastic. I'm sorry, some of you may get sick of hearing it, but McFarlane Toys, and most recently with their interpretation of the Batmobile for $60 as opposed to the HasLab stuff that Marvel Legends has been doing, if they keep going this route, they're going to be losing an absorbent amount of good faith in collectors, and business is going to start to represent that. For me, this and the Across the Spider-Verse wave is frankly the only dips I'm going to be taking into that Marvel Legends pond. But that's just me speaking for myself. I want to hear from you guys now. Go into the comment section. Where do you guys stand on Marvel Legends in 2023 thus far? Is this going to be one of your notable pickups? Is this the only exception you're going to be making thus far? Or are you still going to remain steadfast and wait to see if Marvel Legends is going to improve not only on the quality of their figures, but also on their business practices related to their price, the accessory, and the value that you're getting in return? Otherwise, I appreciate you guys for checking out the video, and if you guys want to check out more, click on the one that's showing up on screen right now. As always, stay humble, and I'll see you later.